Hello, this is Wade Frazier. This is February 6th, 2026, 8:58 a.m. I've been making a series of posts, oral history. So I'm taking advantage of this medium uh, to make videos. It's an oral history of my story and actually the stories of others, which I think is important. Many years ago, I wanted to do something like this, but it'd mean camera crews and stuff. So now I can do it myself. So technology marches on. In the previous installment, and so what it is this oral history when I come upon the characters in my story, which I think merit their own videos. They're basically my heroes. Um, then I'm going to interrupt the flow of my oral history to focus on these people. And the first one I'm coming upon is Gary Wean. Gary Wean helps bring my partner from jail, Dennis Lee. In fact, in the previous video, I get into that a bit, and I've written about Gary a lot. And Gary gave me the best advice I could get. I met with him after reading his book, and his advice was nobody would help me in bringing my partner from jail. And at that time, it looked like there was no hope for my partner, Dennis Lee, in that he was in solitary confinement uh, with an astronomical bail. I had just lived through a kangaroo court preliminary hearing. In fact, the man who arrested Dennis, and again, the case made his career, he was in charge of the jail, in charge of Dennis's treatment as they tried to break him for trial. Dennis was writing his own book at the time, and he predicted he wouldn't live to see the side of the bars again. And he did almost die behind bars. And so and anyway, when I met with Gary, the advice he gave me was critical to my springing Dennis from jail a couple of months later, and the biggest miracle I ever witnessed. And so Gary is in my pantheon, one of my heroes. I'm forever grateful for Gary, who went out of his way to help me, to give me his advice. And so anyway, this video, and I'll do probably a couple of videos, and this video is going to be a very short version of Gary's life. And I've written about Gary a lot over the years. And videos on his relationship to the JFK assassination, which I'll briefly cover here. And these videos, particularly, I think the next video will be more about my relationship with Gary. Gary was born in the Midwest, Iowa, I believe, in 1921, and he was a naval gunner in World War II in the Pacific Theater. And like so many men in those days, when the war was over and he got dumped in California off of the ships and had to make his own way home to Iowa, he decided to stay. And so he stayed, and immediately he entered the police academy, and then graduated, I think, January 46 as a cop in LA. He became an LAPD cop in 1946. And he had over his career, he had various roles: investigator, beat cop, undercover, plainclothes, these kinds of things. And one of the things that Gary did was he put the Jewish mobster Mickey Cohen under surveillance. And this was part of his job. And and Mickey Cohen was the mobster who he used to work for Al Capone. And he was, again, very famous mobster, kind of ran the LA crime scene. His close friend was Bugsy Siegel. In fact, Mickey Cohen invented what's called the race wire in Vegas for the horse races. And Cohen rigged horse races, believe it or not, which Gary witnessed that, how he could rig horse races. And so, he put Cohen under surveillance, and repeatedly he saw Cohen in the company of Jack Ruby. And for you younger viewers, Jack Ruby is the man who shot Lee Harvey Oswald, who was, in theory, Jack Kennedy's assassin. So Ruby was a high-ranking mobster. He was not the small-time nightclub owner that the Warren Commission depicted him as. And Gary, again, because he was surveilling mobsters, they fought back, and they made his life miserable. In fact, one mobster in particular, a guy named Harry Pregerson, who became a federal court judge eventually. But Pregerson ended up railroading Gary out of his job, I think in '54, there in LA. And so then Gary moved to Ventura and became a cop in Ventura's police department until I think '58. And then it was back to LA and he became an investigator for the district attorney. Yeah, criminal intelligence division, I believe. And in those days, Gary and his investigative partner, they saw a guy named Menachem Begin in Cohen's company regularly. And Menachem Begin was this mass murdering terrorist who eventually became prime minister of Israel. In fact, even won a Nobel Peace Prize, irony of ironies. And he saw Begin with Cohen repeatedly. Gary was there at the pool party where John Kennedy was introduced to Marilyn Monroe at the 1960 Democratic Convention. And this was, in her introduction to them, she was being used as bait for a intelligence gathering and blackmail operation against John Kennedy, using her for that. And in fact, Gary was at Monroe's home the night he died. And in fact, the surveillance showed that Monroe was visited, but by her lover and Cohen underling that night, not Bobby Kennedy. And Gary was certain that she was murdered to keep her quiet. So that's the best way to keep somebody quiet. And Gary was also very close friends with Audie Murphy. And again, for you younger viewers, Audie Murphy was the United States' most decorated soldier, World War II war hero, and became a movie star. And war hero turned movie star. He was kind of the prototype for that. And Gary's friendship with Murphy led to a meeting that they had in December 1963 with the very frightened John Tower. And then John Tower was a senator from Texas. And Tower told them that Lee Harvey Oswald, who was in theory Jack Kennedy's assassin, was actually a military intelligence operative who was recruited by E. Howard Hunt into a CIA operation to frame Fidel Castro for a fake assassination attempt on John Kennedy to justify an invasion of Cuba. And Gary first published this in his book in 1987. I believe he started talking to people about it in the early '70s, but in his first book, he went into great detail about this meeting. And today, the leading JFK assassination theories swirl around Oswald, Hunt, the CIA, and Cuba. In fact, I recently heard Daniel Sheehan, a very prominent American attorney, essentially tell Gary's story, but from the mob's angle, as told to him by mobsters. And then the declassification of Operation Northwoods in 1997, a decade after Gary published his book, was about the Pentagon's plan to stage fake terror incidents in the United States and frame Fidel Castro for it to justify an invasion of Cuba. And in fact, Hunt's operation in Northwoods were going about around the same time. And so they were related operations somehow. And in fact, Gary's book and Northwoods document some of the exact same language in both. The Northwoods declassification should have removed any reasonable doubt that Gary was telling the truth as he knew it. Yeah, so Jack Kennedy was murdered in a backfire CIA operation. And Sheehan actually said that Dulles ran it. He gave the go-ahead for that. Doesn't surprise me one bit. And so, so in fact, in my opinion, ever since Jack Kennedy, every American president's been a puppet and knew it. So disposable. Presidents are expendable puppets. Just kind of like Roman emperors were, serving at the pleasure of the Praetorian Guard. Very similar dynamic. And so, no JFK assassination has aged more spectacularly than Gary's. It's still largely ignored. And so in 1966, Gary left the DA in LA and he moved back to Ventura County and became the chief investigator for the Ventura County's Public Defender's Office. And Gary had that job until 1970 when he was asked to help frame people. And the guy who tried to recruit him actually lived in my neighborhood. And anyway, this guy was taking bribes that were like more than his annual salary. And when I read this in Gary's book, it was it was like the light bulb went on, because now I realize why his children dress so fashionably beyond their station, essentially. So yeah, they all had this high end clothing that I never wore growing up, and so but it was one of those offers you can't refuse they made to Gary. So when Gary refused their offer to frame people, and basically frame people, get them out of the way for the gangsters around Ventura County, the judges and the officials and stuff. Yeah, the corruption's legendary in Ventura County. And so when Gary refused their offer, he was railroaded out of his career. And they make you an offer you can't refuse. But Gary didn't take it lying down, and for the rest of his life, he fought back and tried to expose the criminals who run our societies. And in fact, he eventually took his fight to Washington, D.C., where one of his adversaries was none other than Joe Biden. And many out, and Gary suffered through many outrages. Again, murder attempts. So they tried to murder him once, right in his front yard. And in fact, they stole his business from him eventually, and he died destitute in exile in Oregon in 2004. And that's the very, very brief version of Gary's story. And in the next video, I'm going to get more into my relationship with Gary, because we were friends. So after he helped me like that, we became friends for the rest of his life. And yeah, Gary, one of my heroes. And that is all I have for now.